It's weird that I heard Ray complaining about getting audited by them, so he must maintain state license. Oh, she's right now.
Hello, everybody. You all can hear me. I hope they can hear me on Zoom as well. I think that's my test subject down there. Hello and welcome to SLU Grand Rounds. It's my pleasure to be here as the chair of the department and introducing our speaker today. Grand Rounds is a tradition for our academic departments. And we don't have a signing sheet today. If you want credit, you can email Linda House and she'll give you credit. Thank you for being here. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker today, our colleague, faculty member, postdoc fellow, Enoch Azasu. I was looking at Enoch's CV, and the first thing that comes to my mind is that he has been pursuing a path that many of us, immigrants to this country, have pursued over time to come to America and to get the best education we can get, and to learn as much as we can, and to try to do some good in the process. So I really appreciate sharing this path with you and with so many of us in professional circles in America. So Dr. Azasu is from Ghana, and that's where he started his education, where he completed a bachelor's in psychology at the University of Ghana in Accra. He then actually did a postgraduate diploma in London in business administration. He completed a business administration back in Ghana, in Accra, and then he moved to St. Louis, where he completed a master's in social work at WashU. He has a postmaster's certificate in data visualization and communication, also from WashU, and then he got a PhD at WashU in social work. He worked there with our colleague, Dr. Sean Joe, and his thesis was the prevalence and sociocultural risk and protective factors for suicidal behavior, a cross-sectional study of middle school students in the greater Accra region of Ghana. To give you an idea of what he did, he basically did what the CDC does in the US. He did it basically, out of his own initiative with a group in Ghana and coordinating a group at WashU. He completed a survey of these high school students, and that's what we're going to hear about today. I have read some of his studies. We are working together in a number of publications. Dr. Azasu has been he's been here for a little over a month, and he has been already instrumental in mentoring students and residents. And I want all of you to know that Dr. Azasu is here, ready to collaborate with you, be you a SLU student, a SLU resident, or a SLU fellow, or a faculty member. So I would like all of us to take advantage of Dr. Azasu's expertise in psychiatric epidemiology, methods, research, and data analysis, and we're lucky to have him. My vision for Azasu's time here with us is that he will, in due time, join our faculty group and grow professionally as a faculty member here. But from here, I would like this to be a platform for him to realize his dreams of influencing mental health and psychiatric care, not only in St. Louis, not only in the US, but also in his homeland, in Ghana and in Africa in general. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you to Grand Rounds. Thank you for being here, and let's welcome Dr. Azasu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Messias. I think I have to turn off, I don't know which one. I'm supposed to turn off this one or...
That's the camera right there.
No, I mean the light, so that the view will be better, I think. That's what I was told. Yes, I think this is okay.
That one's up. No, it's the front one. Yeah, okay. How's that?
It's better.
Okay.
I'm sure you all can see, right? All right.
Psychiatrists can do it. You get a psychologist.
Yes. Good afternoon, and I'm very excited to be here to be talking with you guys and sharing this wonderful research with you. This will be basically, it will be talking about things that a study that happened in Ghana. And the title is that we're trying to look at the prevalence, the sociocultural risks and protective factors of suicidal behavior among junior high school students in Ghana. And I will later explain the term junior high school students. And this paper has been submitted to the CAWEX. Sorry. All right, so we submitted this paper to the Journal of Social Psychiatry and Psychiatric Epidemiology. So Dr. Messias and I, and then my partners in Ghana, and then also my mentor at WashU, we worked on this and we've submitted it to this journal. So it's currently under review. We are hoping that it will get published soon. So per this paper, it was funded by the West African Research Association in Boston University, and then also the Brown School. I have no financial interest to disclose. The grant was specifically for data collection, so I just wanted to make that clear. I'm supposed to do that. So I'll talk briefly about my educational objectives. My goal is to become a research faculty position here, and also to be able to go into NIH research grant writing. And also I look forward to establishing kind of a global suicide research lab, and then some kind of offering some skill labs for students that we can learn about the way we do research globally. And my educational background, I came from the University of Ghana, as Dr. Messias said. I was there in 2010. I had my degree in psychology, and then I did so many other things, but I ended up with a degree in WashU in 2023 as a PhD student. And I always look at the gap, from 2010 to 2023. That's 13 good years. That was a very long time for me, but I'm still blessed and I'm happy to have been able to achieve all that. It took me a long time, but I did it. So yeah, this is me. When I started my work in the community, I was born and raised in a small village in Greater Accra region. It's near the coast. So I used to go to the clinic. So this was me at a clinic trying to talk to some of the, the nurses, the doctors. They're trying to, look at how we can be supportive as a group. This one was me talking to a group of students. We had to do we're supposed to serve as role models to these young ones in the village, so that they could see that, okay, people from our village could grow up and come up and be something. So that was what I did a lot of my time right after, during my degree, my undergrad, and then right after that. So it was during one of these journeys that I came into mental health. I was going to one of the schools, and then I met one girl who had gone through some sexual trauma. And then she had also lost her father. And she always tells me, Enoch, you can share my story, because my story is what inspired you to come into this work in the first place. And I realized that she was talking a lot. She was trying to be nice, but she didn't sound right. So as we were talking, and then she told me all that she had been through in the past weeks and months. So I asked, how could I be of help? And she was like, I need you to talk to my parents. To talk to my mom, because her dad had passed away. Talk to my mom and let my mom know that, look, I am fine. I just need some counseling. I don't need to be sent to a psychiatric institution, because at that time in Ghana, we had psychiatric institutions where people had to be put in chains, forced to take medications. And she had escaped once. She was even taken to a faith-based center, and whoever was in charge of that faith-based center went further to sexually assault her. And that was a very sad story. So I took it upon myself to start advocating for these young people like her. And by the grace of God, her family listened. I really need to figure out this mic. So I think by the grace of God, her family listened, and they were able to find her a counselor. She was able to go through the process, and today she ended up becoming a pharmacist as we speak. She always tells me, Enoch, say my story because it was because of you. So I decided to devote my time and to this cause, to ensure that young persons who are going through these difficulties in life, that is driving them towards mental distress, they can get the help that they need. So I'll go straight into how WHO defines suicide. And this was in 2004. And I'm sharing this because I'll later on talk about the meaning of suicide, how it has changed. So they define it as an act which is deliberate, performed by the person himself with the knowledge of a fatal outcome. Now, if you come to Africa, the suicide rates in Africa are very high. Now, for those of you who know a little bit about suicide in Africa, about 77% of all the suicide that occur in the world happen in low and middle income countries like Africa. And in the African region alone, our suicide rate that was in 2019 was about 11.2. And the global average is around 9.0 per 100,000. So you can imagine the gap. And this chart clearly tells you, and as you can see from the top, it gets worse as you go down. And those are things that we will explore in the future. But I'm just sharing this chart for us to know how severe the problem is in Africa. And according to the WHO, if you take all the suicide that occurs among adolescents, 88% of that is occurring in low and middle income countries, which most of them are in Africa. Oh, sorry. Yep. So what is the cost of suicide on the African continent? There are social costs, financial costs, moral costs. And a study found in 2019 that, per the 75,000 deaths that occur in Africa, the cost is about $7 billion. So we want to develop as a continent. We want to look at how we can make our continent better. And it looks like we are losing our future generations. So how can we develop if we are losing these future generations? Because in the Western world, we can see that suicide occurs among people who are older. But when you come to developing countries like Africa, in Africa, you realize that it's occurring among the younger generations. So we are losing our future generations. That is why this topic for us for me is very important. So when we come to Ghana, now the last time the WHO went to Ghana to collect data was in 2012. And this data that was collected among 12 to 18 years old, a study found that when you look at the differences in ideation and plan and attempt rates, they were very high, above 20%. So 1 in 4 or about 1 in 5 adolescents were experiencing suicide ideation, plan, and attempts in the last 12 months. And the middle school students were having significantly higher suicide attempts than those in high school. So it tells you that the suicide is occurring among younger ages than we previously thought. And they found risk factors for suicide to include things like bullying, physical attack, things that are in the adolescent's home and environment. Those were the things that were risk factors for suicide among this age group. So when I decided to review the literature on suicide in Ghana, I found that, look, we don't have national epi data on suicide in Ghana, like the way we have in the US, where they collect every year, YRBSS 2021, we don't have that in Ghana. The last time the WHO went there was in 2012, and they felt that it was a nationally representative study, and that data is a decade old. And also, we don't know much about the psychosocial and the sociocultural correlates, because we realized that, look, in 2012, we realized that things in the adolescent's home and environment are causing the suicide, but we don't know much about it. We need more information on that. And also, we didn't have studies that were testing the theories, on suicide behavior among these Ghanaian adolescents. So that was what prompted me to go into this study. And those were the gaps I found that prompted me to go into this study. So my aim was just very simple. I wanted to estimate the prevalence. How is suicide occurring among the population of middle school students in the Greater Accra region? What are the things that are the risk factors, and what are the things that are protecting these adolescents from suicide thoughts and behaviors in the population? And the reason why I chose middle school students was that we can be able to identify those who are at risk at a very early age, and then we can begin to design intervention and treatment approaches. And I'll take a second to explain the use of junior high school and middle school. Now, in the US, we know middle school starts from grade 7 to grade 9. Now, in Ghana, that's like the same age group. So we have the Form 1, Form 2, Form 3. They can call it year 1, year 2, year 3. So when you see these terms, kindly note that. And these are, this age group is like a 3-year post-elementary education level before you go into high school. Now, briefly touch on the place where I collected the data. So this is Ghana. We are in West Africa. So my study was centered around Greater Accra region, and that's the capital of Ghana. It's one of the largest, it's the largest region with in terms of population size, and it's very diverse. So that was why I chose that place for this study. And my population, as I said, was middle school students, because from the literature, yes, suicide was occurring at much younger ages. So I decided to study middle school students so that I can see how it's occurring among the population. And I chose some school districts that were in the Greater Accra region. I chose about 6 school districts. Now, these were randomly selected, but the goal was that we wanted to make sure that we accounted for the variability in the ethnic groups, the variability in the income, and also variability in things like religion, so that the sample could be more representative of the region that we're working with. And my sample size was 800 students. And as you know, most of the time, you want a large sample size because this was a lot of variables. I was measuring a lot of variables just to make sure that I could capture as much risk factors as possible. So I had a sample of 800. And I also was doing some SEM models. So based on all this power analysis and my calculation, the 800 was a very good sample size to give me enough power. I used, I had to go through IRB and had to use the schools. Now, this strategy, which I'm going to talk about, is very unique. And I actually wrote a paper on this because I realized that if you want to collect data in a low resource setting like Ghana, you can't just go to the schools and talk to the students. And even if you do that, how sure are you that they are going to have that trust? Because this was an issue that had a lot of stigma, which is suicide. So I had to devise a strategy. So I had to talk to the schools, be in at parent-teacher meetings to talk to the parents, engage with stakeholders, just let them know how important this study was and why I needed to be able to be given the opportunity to interview these students. So the students had to first express interest and say, okay, based on what I had shared with them, they expressed their interest. And then they were given a cover letter and the consent documents to take home. Now, these letters had to be translated. So we also had to make sure that, look, the parents are not just going to be home and then they'll receive something in English. They've heard about the study, but they had to get something in the language that they understood, and that they could ask questions, they could call, ask questions. And then that was what happened. And then the parents were supposed to complete a consent at home, discuss with your child and see, is this something you want your child to take part in? Because it was definitely cross-sectional. And then the students had to come to school and complete the consent in school. Now, this was to make sure, so that the students had an independent choice to say that, okay, I want to take part in the study without, the parent, influencing the student not to take part or not. So we sent out 975 consents. And out of that, 800 returned, which was a response rate of about 82%. And then about 175 students who had initially expressed interest were not able to take part into the study and were lost through follow-up. So we eventually had about 786 to do our analysis. And we passed through the Ghana Education Service as well to make sure that we had the right approval to do the study. So this was one of the classrooms where we collected the data. This is an Islamic school. We had about 198 students who expressed interest there. So they were completing the measures, and we seated them. As you can see, they were seated a little bit apart just to make sure that they could have some privacy to answer the questions. And the surveys was administered in paper format. And this is also very crucial because we realized that, look, if we want to be able to collect a large sample study in a low resource setting like Ghana, or, we could not rely on electronic means because there could be challenges with the internet. And then you also wanted the process to be as quick as possible. So we had to use a paper format, which was very quick. It made us, and the students were already familiar with it. And these questions were pilot tested. So quickly, it was very quick. It took us a couple of weeks and we were able to get everything done. So this was an example. And we provided compensation for the students. Each student was given some educational materials, just enough for them to, to be happy to participate, but not too much to coerce them. And we had to make sure that there was some safety plan for these students. So we had some debriefing sessions, and this was done by my team. So we had to just share with them, general things about mental health, what are the warning signs that they need to look out for. But luckily for us, no student expressed any severe mental health crisis during the study because it was just cross-sectional, very quick process. So we had to do some debriefing just to make sure that we took care of those who were possibly going to be triggered by some of the questions that they had to answer. And then the measures that we used, we actually measured a lot of things because we wanted to be sure that we could capture all the psychosocial and psychological factors as much as we could. Demographics, sexual intercourse, and Dr. Messias used the word mini YRBSS. So the YRBSS measures a lot of things, like this. So we had to measure all these things, number of close friends, the sleep, and then of course the suicide behaviors. But we included things like stigma, things like traditional beliefs, their religious orientation, because we wanted to look at some of these cultural factors and how they impact suicide rates. So all these measures, these are measures that we have been used in the US, but we had to pilot test them in Ghana among a small sample just to be sure that we could get the readability and the comprehension right, and also the cultural sensitivity, because we wanted the students to be able to give the answers as accurate as possible. And we didn't collect any identifying information, just to be clear. Basically the age, the sex, the school level, and that's it. So this was the characteristics of our study participants. The age range was around 12 to 19 years. The mean age was 15.5 years. About 55% were female. A lot of them were from public schools. And then a lot of them were at the GHS3, that's a year 3. And we had majority being Christians. And then the ethnic groups, as you can see, Greater Accra region has several ethnic groups, but these were the largest ethnic groups. And you could see that it was evenly distributed across the ethnic groups. So I'll talk about how we analyze the data. So we have to analyze the data using SPSS. We use various softwares, SPSS, we use data, and then we also use the M+ to do our SEM analysis. We have to do some logistic regression, some chi-squares, just to see associations. And then we use an alpha level of 0.05 because we wanted to be sure that we could capture, we don't want to miss any potential differences or type 1 errors. And most of the studies in Ghana used a 0.05 level of significance. So I'll go straight into my results, the risk prevalence. So clearly, our ideation rates were very high for the lifetime and then also for the 12-month. And the unique thing about this study was that most of the studies collect just 12 months suicide behavior. Hey, what's your suicide rate in the last 12 months? But our study, we asked them about their lifetime suicide rate. Have you ever thought about suicide? Have you ever planned suicide? And that was the unique thing that we found, that the lifetime suicide rates were higher than the 12-month suicide rates. And also we realized that the earliest age at which a child or the student will first think about suicide was 8 years. Now, previous studies had found, 12 years, but this one was 8 years. And you realize that at least by age 15, majority of the students would have thought about suicide at least by age 15, which is very concerning. And when we look at our chi-square results, female participants were significantly more likely to experience ideation at 12 months and then at lifetime. These were females. And then also we found that when you look at the various ethnic groups, the Gadangbe, the Ewe, the Akan, and these are ethnic groups that are in the Greater Accra region, the major ethnic groups, you realize that there was some association, significant association between how these kids were thinking about suicide ideation at 12 months and the ethnic group in which they belonged to. And then we also found Yeah, we also found that among private schools, even though the private school numbers were very low, but there was significant suicide ideation, or private school students reported significantly higher suicide ideation and plan than those in public schools. And this is also was a little bit surprising of a result, because you should expect that people, those in the private schools, have things much easier. That the factors there should be much different than public schools, but this was what we found. So we decided to go into the correlates, okay, just to see which of the factors that we measured, which of them have significant, bivariate relationship with suicide. And things like hunger, substance use, sexual intercourse, dating were popping up. When it came to ideation, you could see clearly that there were those who, those who were having sexual intercourse, those who were even dating, were experiencing higher ideation than those who were not. Substance use the same, hunger in the last 30 days, sexual intercourse. And these were some of the sociocultural variables which we thought, could impact suicide rates. And the literature had found, in other countries, in other sub-Saharan African countries, and we found similar results in our sample. It's like this. I have to let this go up. Sorry. Yeah. And when you take the sociological and psychological variable, stigma, parental support, sleep, anxiety, stress, we also found that they were strongly related to 12-month suicide ideation. When you look at suicide ideation, for instance, you realize that those who were having strong stigma, towards suicide, like they had very strong attitudes or negative attitudes, they were more likely to experience suicide ideation. And the same thing with parental support. Those who had less parental support were more likely to experience suicide ideation. With sleep, as you can see, less sleep, more suicide ideation. The risk increases. The same with anxiety and then stress. When you look at suicide plan, find the same thing there. Now with suicide plan, it became stigma, parental support, sleep, depression came in, anxiety and stress. And yesterday I was reading something about depression, and I realized that depression is associated with brooding. And I thought to myself, suicide planning, how is suicide planning a form of brooding? And I think, yes, it's a form of brooding. And that was why I was surprised about this result. Because that depression comes in when it's at suicide plan. But when it comes to suicide attempt, the variables kind of decreases a bit. Whereas that stigma still stays there, parental support is still there, anxiety and stress. So I moved further to do a multivariate logistic regression to see how these changes when you put all the variables together. And that is what I'm going to show next. As you can see, the only thing that became significant, was parental support. It reduced the odds of ideation, plan, and attempt after controlling for all variables. And this finding is very crucial because it tells you that, look, the risk factors can be present, but when you put everything together, parental support can make a difference. It can just minimize everything at all levels of suicide behavior. And when I put the psychological variables together, the same thing. Depression, the effect diminished, anxiety, the effect diminished, but stress was there. And this tells you that at that age, the kind of stress they are experiencing seem to be so strong that no matter what other factors are present, it can impact their suicide ideation, their suicide plan, and then their suicide attempt. So I'll go on to discuss these findings and then just talk about, So the three key things that I learned, and that I'm sure you people will learn right after this presentation is that, look, when it comes to suicide ideation the last 12 months, 1 out of 5 of these students have experienced suicide ideation the last 12 months. And the interpersonal factors, psychosocial factors, sexual intercourse, dating, hunger, substance use are very critical to 12-month suicide behaviors. Stress is increasing the odds of suicide behaviors, and then parental support is reducing the odds of suicide behaviors in the last 12 months. The sex differences. Now, girls are thinking about suicide more than boys, but they are engaging in suicide behaviors similarly with boys. So that's the question. Is it that boys are having impulsive suicide behaviors, said that they don't think about it, but they just move straight to attempts? Those are things that future research has to look at, and it was a very striking finding for me, because we need to ask ourselves that why are these girls thinking about suicide more than boys? Does it have to do with the gender norms in Ghana? Does it have to do with the kind of pressure these adolescent girls are facing, that they are always they're having significantly high suicide thoughts? What are the things that is increasing their stress? Is it their risk for maybe interpersonal violence? What are the things that we need to look to see what is causing this increased suicide thoughts among these girls? Is it also the culture of silence, where they cannot voice out their feelings? So those are the things that future research will look at. And the ethnic differences, yes. So Greater Accra region has several ethnic groups, but the major ethnic groups, the Ewe, the Akan, why were some of them experiencing higher suicide rates, significantly higher suicide rates than the others? Does it have to do with the cultural norms in the various ethnic groups? So I'm asking myself, how do we know the best way to study suicide behavior among these ethnic groups, so that we can capture, so that maybe what are the Akans people doing? What are the Ewes doing? What cultural values are in these various ethnic groups that are bringing about these differences? And we all know that, in Africa, we tend to think that culture is the same. All of them behave the same. Or when you go here, they're the same, but it's very variable. And this finding kind of strengthened that argument that, look, we cannot have that monolithic idea that, they should all have the same suicide behavior. But you realize that in certain ethnic groups and ethnic differences, there are certain things that are making a difference. So we need to be able to identify those things and how to measure them and how to apply them, towards our intervention efforts. The sociocultural risk factors. So things like substance use, stigma, sexual intercourse, hunger that I found, to be associated. So how do these things, the question I ask myself, how do these things increase the risk or potentially increase the risk for suicide behavior? Because someone will ask, and these findings somebody can ask me, why do you think a child's attitude towards suicide can put them at more risk for suicide? And I can say potentially that, look, if you're in a country where mental health is stigmatized, okay, where there are laws against suicide behavior. In Ghana, prior to this study, in Ghana, when someone thinks about suicide or expresses a concern or attempts suicide and doesn't die, that person could be arrested. In fact, people are arrested. So if these attitudes are there, why do you think someone will come up and say, hey, I'm having this distress, I need help? That person will not seek help. So that is a potential, and that is what I think makes a difference. Something like sexual intercourse or dating, sexual activity, these are complex things that these middle school students are having to navigate. But what are the schools doing? Are the parents educating these children on how to navigate these complex relationships? Those were the things that I felt like are potentially contributing to these socioecological factors. Things like hunger. hunger and nutrition. You know, a child who wakes up in the morning, maybe is hungry and goes to school hungry. How do you expect that child to study? And that child, how do you expect that child to have hope? And all those things can impact, their brain function, their mood, how they cope with stresses, some of the emotional challenges that they face. So I think those are some of the ways that we can look at how the complexities or the ways that these variables cause suicide risk and how we can provide appropriate support and intervention for these students. The psychological risk factors like, stress, and I saw, we also saw that stress was like, it stood out. So you ask yourself that, what are some of the things that are causing the stress among these students? What are the sources of the stress? We need to ask ourselves, what are the sources of these anxieties and depression that these students are experiencing? Does it have to do with the academic pressures? Does it have to do with the family expectations? Does it have to do with peer pressure? Or maybe they are just uncertain about their future, or probably maybe even the social media usage. Unfortunately, I couldn't measure social media usage, but it could also be that these children are experiencing stress because of the high use of social media nowadays among the youth. So those and some of their identity struggles. So those were some of the things I was thinking about as I was analyzing the psychological risk factors. And those are the things that I think that needs to be discussed, as we try to understand these results. But a good thing is that parental support does everything. Not does everything, but parental support was key. And this is a school, they're having a PTA meeting, parents come, and I'm sure most of you go to parent-teacher stuff. So they are sitting nice. And look at this boy, he's holding the mic for his dad to speak. How is it that in this study, we found that parental support was a very strong protective factor for suicide among these adolescents? But this is a culture in Africa where parents are sometimes very strict or over strict. And parents sometimes are a little bit not involved in the things that their children are doing. So this was a very crucial finding for me, and I think we need to discuss it properly and see what relationships or what are the mechanisms, what are the things that parents need to do. Does it have to do with maybe spending time with the kids? Does it have to do with homework? Does it have to do with being involved in school, like PTA? Those are the things that we need to really study to see how does parental factors affect these adolescents, and how does it help them to be able to deal with the things like stress or hunger or the other things that that we saw that they diminished after adding parental factors, all those things that diminished. How does parental factors diminish those things? And that is one thing I would like to explore more in the future. So the next thing I'll talk about is, what does this result mean for us, as researchers, as practitioners, as policymakers? And the first thing is that, as a researcher like me, I realized that suicide as it's occurring among these adolescents is complex. It's not the same. It's occurring differently, ethnic groups. It's occurring differently by gender. Even between public and private schools, it's occurring differently. So we need to understand how it's occurring. But we also need to develop and test screening tools. Because now you realize that things like hunger, things like substance use, things like sexual intercourse can predict suicide behavior. But when I'm not sure how much of the screening tools that we use capture these things. Because they'll ask you, the screening tool might probably ask you things that are unrelated or are not predictive of your future suicide behavior. And that is what I think researchers should start to do. We need to start as much as possible developing and testing these screening tools, which can be used at the school level, we can be used at the clinics, and also we need to start looking at how we can track suicide nationally. Because if it's not occurring, if it's occurring differently, even in Greater Accra region, then imagine nationally. Imagine in other regions. We need to go to other regions and say, hey, how is suicide occurring in this region as well? What are the differences? What are the similarities? And those are the things that I think researchers need to look at. clinical practice. A lot of you here are clinicians and doctors and physicians. So I was thinking, how do these results help physicians, clinicians, and practitioners in Ghana? How are they able to, make a difference? And I think the most important thing is that we need to be able to identify these warning signs. And there should be strong collaboration with the schools, with the traditional leaders, with the religious leaders, and also with the parents. We need to look at how we can offer hope and support to these kids. And those are the things that I think that clinicians need to look at when it comes to trying to prevent suicide among these adolescents. And then in terms of policy, if we are losing these future generations, these very young ages, there should be youth-targeted suicide prevention efforts. We should focus on parental factors. We should focus on the stress. We should also focus on the psychosocial factors. And we can also improve our mental health infrastructure in Ghana, trying to look at ways by which we can have counselors in schools. We can have an access or a means by which these kids can go to someone other than their parents and say, hey, I'm experiencing this stress, I'm experiencing these problems. And we also need to create more awareness of this problem, because right now, someone might think that this is not really occurring. When I started this work, I remember people asked me, are you sure these findings are true? Are you sure it's a problem? And as more studies kept coming out, more studies kept being published about the rates of suicide in Ghana, and then people realized that, look, it is really, really true. And we really need to create more awareness of this problem. And we need to pursue the decriminalization of suicide behavior in Ghana. Right now, yes, it's been decriminalized, but we need to make sure people are aware that it's been decriminalized. Not only at the criminal level, but also at the traditional level, because it's still a crime for certain traditions that when someone dies by suicide, there are punishments that are given traditionally. So we need to decriminalize suicide both at the government level and also at the traditional level. And that is something that we can work to change policy on that. And I'll briefly talk about the limitations of this study, just as protocol. Because of course, this is a cross-sectional study, so I am being careful not to generalize to the whole country of Ghana. And also, it's possible that the rates of suicide that are being shown here are much higher. Because if people are afraid to come out and say that, hey, I'm experiencing suicide behavior, it means that there are some people in the schools, or there are some adolescents who are not able to come out and say, look, I'm experiencing this, because they are afraid of the punishment. So there's a possibility, that the rates could be higher. And also, we need to do more qualitative studies, because some of these variables are very difficult to quantify, like something like hunger, some of those things, you cannot really look at the mechanisms with suicide behavior until you do more qualitative studies. So those are some of the limitations of my study, which I think in future studies can look at. So I would end by thanking my funders, the West African Research Association and the Brown School, and then also my thanks to my advisor and mentor, my team in Ghana, and the students, the school heads, the parents, all those who helped to make this work possible. And my current mentor, Dr. Messias, Dr. Jeff, they are helping me to be able to push this work. And I know this work is important because not only adolescents in Ghana, but look at the US. Look at these Black kids. Recently, we found that, look, among Black children, suicide is higher than white children. So if we are starting to understand how these socioecological or sociocultural factors increase suicide rates, we can transfer this knowledge to the US as well. And those are the things that I think working with Dr. Messias, I'm beginning to develop that research track record, to be able to understand suicide among these kids, not only in Ghana, but in the St. Louis region. and also in other parts of the world and in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think Dr. Lin, who will be joining us in future, will make this work stronger and better. So I would like to appreciate all of them for their help so far. So this is my concluding slide. These lovely kids, we need to protect their future because they are our future generations. You know, researchers, practitioners, school officials, policymakers, we all need to play our part because these kids are those that are going to move the continent forward one day, and they are too young to be experiencing these things. So we have to do our part to save these future generations. Thank you. Yeah, questions?
No, thank you for a very interesting presentation, and they raised a number of interesting questions. I have a couple regarding the sexual intercourse and dating. First, would you have any information about differences between males and females on those parameters? And the second is any information about whether those parameters are related to presence or absence of parental support.
Yeah. So
repeat the question.
Yeah. So I think your name, please.
Dr. Feldhaus.
Dr. Feldhaus asked a question about the suicide ideation rates differences between sexes as it pertains to dating and sexual intercourse, and how these differences play into the suicide rates. And I think I'm currently working on an analysis to look at this thing specifically. From the top, females were experiencing more suicide ideation, and I can tell you culturally that, you know, relationships and dating tend to be more male dominated. Females probably have less say. You know, at that age, they are under pressure, you know, and I can't speak to people's personal experiences, but I might assume that, you know, those girls who are in relationships or who are dating may be at more risk. And my analysis in the future might show, and I think that I might assume that that will be the case, that the girls will be experiencing more ideation because they may be bearing that pressure, you know, to have to be in a relationship, you know, because, you know, when you are in a relationship, you know, a lot of the risk also falls on the girl because you are at risk of being sexually victimized, you know, sexual abuse, you know, the risk of teenage pregnancy, all those things that they have to deal with, you know. So I might assume that will be where the risk will swing towards the girls. I hope that helps.
Thank you again for the wonderful presentation.
Yep.
My name is Neil. I had a question about how you quantified parental support being one of the protective factors, how you asked about that and how you assessed through that, what it actually means on a micro scale.
Yes. So parental support was something that it was a 10-item scale which I used to assess parental support. I asked them various things, you know, because you realize that it could be it encompasses a lot. And the WHO had measured some form of parental support in terms of whether your father is present or not. But I decided to go a bit further, and I'm trying to pull up my code book real quick so that I can, you know. So questions like, you know, how hard is it to discuss your personal life with your parents? And they had to rate it from, you know, a level of difficulty. You know, are you receiving enough care and warmth from your parents? And, you know, these are words that the kids love. Care, warm, you know. How warm are you feeling? How hard or easy it is to get advice about your school studies from your parents? Things like personal things. Are you able to ask your parent for personal things? Are you able to ask your parent for any other thing? You know, kids have personal things and then other things that they always want. You know, and I had to, you know, ask them all those questions. And I think that measure is a very strong measure. And that's why it kept holding. And I can share that measure with you. It's a very good measure. And then it was a Likert scale, they had to rate it out of 1 out of 4, and then the higher the score, the easier, the higher parental support that you are receiving. It's a perceived parental support, how the child perceives it. Any other questions? Okay. All right, on time. Thank you all.
Thank you. Those of you that want to have lunch, there is lunch leftovers in the basement of Montelion Hall. It's worth going there.
For those who have not signed the sign-in sheet, it's
Yeah.
being passed around right now.
It's right here. Are you going to the Korean one? Thank you too.
Thank you.
very
I
much.
think we can definitely, kind of going
Yeah.
all the way and back to the.
Okay, nice to meet you. You on the first floor?
I'm happy to drive.
Hi.
I'm in the second floor.
I really like trying to.
There's so many kids that we can work on together, okay?
So you coordinate the classes with parents.
Yes.
I really love to have some kind of send me an email.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
That's what you.
Yeah, that's a short.
Oh, no. I'm not. I don't choose my advisor in Washington. Really? I went to Washington. I went to Washington for undergrad. Don't care for that would be dangerous. Next day. Good question. There have to be certain protection. In terms of US, those just being right? Okay. It's like you're already at risk. Good job. Don't forget the things out of bread.
No, you did great. Oh, somebody's still there. Finish this Zoom.
Thank you. So, I'm really going to. Thanks for you.
Thank you all for attending the lecture. We're gonna end now.